We are, if you want to follow along with me, we want to continue on a series called Journey to the Cross. And so you can turn in your Bibles if you want to follow the Bible that is in the seat in front of you. It's page 1548. And this series has been about, if you're visiting for the first time here, it's a series that's been looking at the last week of Jesus' life and ministry. And starting from the triumphant entry that he came in. And just events that took place throughout that week. And in each event, this encounter between the divine and humanity, how that impacts our life, or how that might impact our life today as we look at it. And so we've been looking through every one of those events. And we've come to the last two, which are huge, obviously. Jesus' death we're going to look at today, and then his resurrection next week. And I say it's huge because if you call yourself a Christian, this is what it's about. I mean, everything we talk about doing, all other 52 weeks we might get together and discuss the truths of the Bible and what we're called to do. All of it is meaningless unless you can really come to terms and understand the idea of Jesus dying for you and then the resurrection that took place after that. And so it's really important for us all, I think, to take that time and take a look at that. And so today, of course, as we're talking about the death, and in fact we're talking about it again on Friday a little bit. On Friday I'm really going to examine more of this amazing love that's demonstrated and what the cross really means. And obviously it's the most important aspect of this that we want to look at. And so I don't want to take away from what we're talking about today. But there's another element that I want to look at today that ties into this idea of looking at the event. This event that took place, and just by the very nature of what took place, how might that impact my own life? What can I learn about it that would actually have an impact in the way that I look at life? It's the greatest story of suffering, if you will, for a man who didn't deserve it. When you think of all the stories of suffering, there's nothing that can compare to this. But in his own suffering, we can find encouragement about our own suffering. And so let's first of all read the passage that I've selected out of here, take a look at it, and then we're going to go back through and look at some things that we can gain from this story. So in Matthew 27, starting at verse 31, this is what we read. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him, and then they led him away to crucify him. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. They came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. And there they offered Jesus wine to drink mixed with gall, but after tasting it, he refused to drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots, and sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Above his head, they placed the written charge against him. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. Two rebels who were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads, and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God." In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him. He saves others, they said, but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God, but God rescued him. Let God rescue him now if he wants to, for he said, "I am the Son of God." In the same way, the rebels who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And when some of the standing there heard this, they said, "He's calling Elijah." Immediately one of them ran and got a sponge, and he filled it with wine vinegar, put it on the staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him." When Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. And at that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. And they came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." I should just say too, as we're going into this, it really would benefit you to look at the other accounts of this story in the other Gospels, because each one goes into a little more detail about it, and you can see, the big picture of what's being described here. But Matthew gives a good overview for what we're talking about today. So, in my hand I have an anchor. Does anybody know what the anchor is used for? I mean, I suppose anybody with a boat, you would hope, would have a clue of what. Maybe you don't use it, but it's, they're used in boats, and obviously you toss it out and you anchor yourself to some ground if you want to stay in the spot you're in, so you don't drift or you don't run into something else. And I'm told it's very useful, to be able to have an anchor on hand just in case. In fact, from what I've been told, if you were in a storm, in a hurricane, for example, in a boat, the best thing to do is not to take your boat and, tie up on the dock or the shoreline, because you're going to damage your boat, but in fact go out into the water and cast out an anchor or two or three and secure them to ground, give them a little bit of room so that the boat can kind of go with the swell and stuff. But that's the safest place for you to be, anchored out in the water, as opposed to kind of what I would think, like, get on shore, because they said the anchor is what you really gives you the security you need to be able to avoid the dangers of life that are kind of around you. Well, this story of Jesus has truths in it that are anchors for life when we really look at them. The 6 hours, there's 6 hours here on Friday, really defines humanity's greatest suffering, as I had said earlier. But also the 6 hours defines, kind of offers humanity our greatest hope. Max Lucado describes these anchor points, where he uses a similar illustration in his book 6 Hours One Friday, when he writes this: "Those 6 hours were no normal 6 hours. They were the most critical hours in history. For during those 6 hours on that Friday, God embedded in the earth 3 anchor points sturdy enough to withstand any hurricane." End of quote. What was Lucado describing when he was talking about that? What he's talking about is that there are truths that are embedded in the story of the death and crucifixion of Jesus, that when we grasp those for ourselves and we hold on to them ourselves, that they become an anchor for us that can secure us, that no matter what life will throw our way, no matter storms come in our life, no matter what thoughts come in our way, that they can provide us the safe and secure place to keep us safe. It's enough to withstand any kind of regret, any feeling of worthlessness you might have. It's enough to withstand any kind of a collapse financially in your income, or a fear of the future, of any uncertainties, any feeling of rejection, anything that you might be weighing on you now that you're feeling like, life is consuming me. When we grasp these anchors into our life and we embed ourselves into them, Scripture talks about the idea that they can help hold us fast and keep us safe. So what are the anchors that we're talking about here? First of all, one of the first anchors is that our lives are not futile. I don't know if you have, but I've had it, where in life sometimes you get to a point where you wonder if life's even worth it. It's just so hard and so difficult that you just kind of want to give up. You just want to step away from life because of the difficulty of it, and you're overwhelmed by it. You wonder, would anybody even miss you if you were gone? Have you even done anything that someone appreciates about you? Do they even care about you? Well, the cross tells us, of course, that they would. Picture in this particular passage the arrogance of humanity as you look at this. Verse 31 talks about the soldiers mocking him after they had beaten him. They put up the King of the Jews because it's a mocking of what they're trying to say. Verse 39 talks about the crowd passing by, hurling insults and mocking Jesus as he's up on the cross. The chief priests, teachers, the elders, all these arrogant people mocking him, saying, "Come on, save yourself. What's the matter? You can't save yourself. You're the Son of God. Can't God save you?" Even the rebels, these two guys being crucified with him, have enough in them to insult Jesus. Like one last thing they can say before they die. Verse 34, if you haven't caught it too, talks about them even in the crucifixion, because it is so unbearable, that they will offer like this wine as a way of kind of a numbing. And Jesus refused it. He didn't want to numb the pain and the suffering that he was going through. Why would he allow creation, his own creation, to treat him that way? Why would he be willing to take on that kind of suffering and bear the whole thing? I mean, thank goodness it wasn't, but if it was me, I'd have gone down and I'd have laid into him. I mean, the arrogance of creation to act like they're better than Jesus himself, and yet he took it on. Why? I think it's because Jesus sees something in you and me that's worth dying for, and willing to do it freely. That the thought of us thinking that we're of no value, or that we're worthless, or no one cares is ludicrous when you consider what Jesus Christ was willing to do for us. In John 10:18, Jesus says this, "No one takes it," referring to his life, "from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. I have the authority to lay it down, and I have the authority to take it up again." Isaiah 53:10, I read it this morning, says in here, it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. Everything you hear about the story of the cross and the death of Jesus is a story about that was done voluntarily. There was never a moment where society or humanity was in control. There was never a moment where, against God's will, we went ahead and did this thing and God spun it to make it work. But in fact, from throughout it all, even before creation, God saw in us, had a love for us and a desire for a relationship with us to such an extent that Jesus was willingly to the cross for us. Because he thought it was worth it. We were worth it. The death of Jesus, and we see it's filled with purpose. That in fact, there was a design behind it. That Jesus saw our life we're dying for. He saw there was a reason for his death, a reason to restore us with God, a reason in our life that he wanted to have that relationship. There's nothing in our life that can be considered futile when you consider it through the eyes of Jesus. And maybe you are thinking about your life as being meaningless, or being worthless, or being or feeling of giving up. I would say to you then, look to the cross as an anchor to realize, how can you? If Christ was willing to do this for you, how could you possibly think that it wasn't worth it? Because Jesus is saying that it is. And his death is an invitation to discover that purpose. The second thing in here, so that's one of the anchors, is this idea of purpose, and our life is not futile. Second anchor that we can hold on to here then is that our failures are not fatal. I mean, I've had many times in my life where I've wondered, God is like saying, you know what, I'm done with this guy. He's screwed up too many times. He's messed up. Enough already. And from far back from the beginning of creation, that's the way God laid it out. God said, look, there's a punishment for sin, and that punishment is death. Eternal separation from God. And anyone who's committed sin, that's it. That's the way it is. He's a just God. There's a right God. There's no right and wrong. There's no fudging. There's no any of that kind of stuff. It's all there. That's the punishment. And it's not hard for us then to be able to see in our own life the failures in life and not within that feel like it's fatal. To feel like our life is being destroyed, we're dying a slow death. And even for those who don't believe in the cross, I mean, you can watch the news, you can look around and realize, man, it is true. The brokenness of life, the evil of life, the destruction, all that stuff is just tearing down life and society. We see the path of what's taking place. In verse 45, it describes this on the cross, this darkness coming over the earth.